Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are really delighted to see that we have people attending from all over the world, and a very warm welcome wherever you are to our MSCA 2025 Postdoctoral Fellowship webinar. Before I introduce the webinar, I want to mention that we have closed captioning available, and you can alter the size of those captions by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to our website within the next couple of days. And a link to the recording will also be sent to everyone who registered. Please note that any AI tools that join this call, such as AI note takers, will be removed for security reasons. My name is Jane Carrigan, and I'm the interim head of the Irish Marie Skłodowska-Curie office, or the IMSCO for short. And I'm an MSCA national delegate and one of two national contact points for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions in Ireland. The IMSCO is supported by Research Ireland and operated under a joint partnership with the Irish Universities Association. Our mission is to support the research community in Ireland across all disciplines and sectors, in both applying for MSCA funding and in implementing MSCA projects. And we do this in a number of ways, including promoting MSCA programs and supporting applicants through workshops, through information sessions, and of course through webinars like this one. We also provide query support to applicants. So if you have queries in the days and months ahead, please do get in touch with us. For more information on the services we provide, please visit our website. My colleague and fellow MSCA National Contact Point, Blanca Suarez-Bilbao, will post the link to our website as well as our contact details in the chat function now. Thank you, Blanca. I also want to mention that the Euro Access Ireland services are hosted within the Irish Universities Association. Euro Access Ireland provides tailored and free advice to researchers and their families coming to work or study in Ireland. Euro Access also provides a platform for posting expressions of interest for MSCA Fellows. And we will post further details on Euro Access into the chat now. Our webinar today is focused on the European Union's MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowship Funding Programme. The scheme supports researchers' careers with a focus on training, skills development and career enhancement through excellent research projects. This is a session for potential applicant researchers, supervisors and host organisations based in Ireland from across all disciplines and sectors, including but not limited to higher education institutions, research organisations, industry and civil society organisations. There will be a Q&A session after the presentations, so I invite you to please post your questions into the Q&A function, and we will address as many of those as we can. And many thanks to all of you who have posted questions to us at the registration stage. So that brings us to our guest speakers for today. We are delighted to be joined by our expert panel, which includes Irache Garcia-Bayona from the European Research Executive Agency, who will present an overview of the postdoctoral fellowship call. Following Irache's presentation, we will hear from two case studies from Irish organisations. And these include Dr. Tobias Engel, a supervisor of MSCA Fellows from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and Dr. Sarah Josephine Schaefer, MSCA Fellow from the University of Limerick. We'll begin though with our first speaker, Irache Garcia-Bayona from the European Research Executive Agency. Irache, you can go ahead and share your screen now while I introduce you. Irache completed her master's degree in international and comparative education in Stockholm University and then moved to Brussels, where she worked in the Erasmus Plus programme. She joined the European Research Executive Agency more than 2.5 years ago, and since then has worked in the management of the MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowship Programme. Among many other tasks, her team is in charge of coordinating the MSCA Postdoctoral Fellowships proposal evaluation, monitoring the ongoing projects and assessing the project deliverables and technical and financial reporting. Irache, you have a wealth of experience. I can see your slides on the screen, and I'm really delighted you can join us today. So over to you.
Hello, Jane, you hear me?
I hear you. Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
All good.
sorry for that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Jane. First of all, I want to begin by thanking the NCP Ireland and especially the Irish MSCA office led by Jane for this invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be presenting here the postdoctoral fellowship of the MSCA on behalf of my team and the research executive agency. I will begin by doing an overview to the MSCA actions and the postdoctoral fellowships. We will continue with presenting the main objectives and the eligibility criteria that are applicable for the new call, and also a bit of an explanation of what is required of the applicants, including the evaluation criteria. And I will also present some data about the IRIS applications and the IRIS statistics of the past call of 2024. Last but not least, there will be the questions, but as Jane explained, it will not be at the end of my presentation, but rather at the end of the session, so after Tobias and Sarah's presentations. So, what are the MSCA? The Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, or MSc actions, is an EU-level research and mobility program established by the Commission in 1996 to support the mobility and the training of researchers across Europe. Within all this, within the excellent science pillar of the Horizon Europe Framework Program. So the Marie Curie Sklodowska-Curie actions are a responsibility of the Director General of Education and Culture for its policy aspect, and then in the day-to-day management, they are dealt by the Research Executive Agency, so REA. So since its creation, the MSCA program has already supported more than 120,000 researchers in different stages of their career, making it quite a unique program, not only for its huge scale, but also because it's quite inclusive in the fields it covers and its bottom-up approach, which I will explain a bit more in detail later on. So Marie Curie actions are divided in different programs, as you see, for, as I mentioned just now, different career stages of the researchers. But today we will focus on the postdoctoral fellowships, which aim to support the excellent postdoctoral researchers in their training and mobility across Europe. So for the, as you see there, the total budget for the whole program for the period 2021-2027, so for this financial framework, is 6.6 billion, which give us an average of 250 million per year for our postdoctoral fellowships. So as you see, it's an important budget. Here you have a bit more in detail the estimated budget for 2025. As you see there, is still not final because the final figures will only be available and published after the call opening on the 8th May 2025. As you may have seen already, there has been a delay on the opening of the call, which now is established, and if everything goes well, will happen on the 8th of May. There you can see also how the budget is divided. So on one hand, we have 343 million for the European fellowships and another almost 61 for the global fellowships. Later on, I will go a bit more in detail on what are the difference between these two different fellowships. The call deadline is established already as 10th of September, so that is fixed. And the overall objective is to enhance the creative and innovative potential of researchers holding a PhD and who are wishing to acquire new skills through advanced training, international, interdisciplinary, and intersectoral mobility. So here we have three key aspects. On one hand, the mobility. As part of these fellowships and this program, the researcher is expected to relocate to a new project, to a new country, in order to implement their proposal. Then intersectoral, it makes reference to a growing focus on a growing emphasis on ensuring that researchers gain exposure to non-academic and industrial research settings, in addition to the most traditional research academic settings. And last but not least, this program has an important bottom-up approach, meaning that you, as the researcher, you are the one who defines the project subject and the scope of your proposal. Meaning that at the end of the day, we are funding and we are supporting researchers across all scientific fields. Then here, another important details. These grants are mono-beneficiary, meaning that there is one researcher and one host organization. Here, an important remark: the official beneficiary of the funding is your host organization, who afterwards signs a contract with you, the researchers, to implement that project. As I mentioned before, there are two types of fellowships, European and global fellowships, which I will detail in the next slide. The host organization, so this beneficiary must be located in an EU country or otherwise on an associated country to the Horizon Europe program. As I mentioned, it's open to all research domains. So no matter what academic field you come from, you can apply, including Euratom. So for Euratom, I recommend to look at the specific work program of Euratom, because indeed, in areas such as the restrictions for the nationality of researchers, in general terms, our our European fellowships don't have any restraints for any nationality, but in the case of global fellowships at Euratom, there are some specific restrictions. As some novelties this year, here you can see that as January 2024, UK has become an associated country to Horizon Europe again. So now UK is an eligible country to be your host in European fellowships. And you don't have to, it's not part of global fellowships anymore, but now it can be a host as a European fellowship. It's highly likely that will be the same case for Switzerland. Switzerland is now in the last stages of reaching an agreement to join as an associated country of the Horizon Europe. They're about to sign the agreement, but still not official, still not done. So, but it's likely that still can happen before the opening of the 2025 call. So I strongly recommend you that after the 8th of May, you check if you're interested in doing your European fellowship in Switzerland, and check if indeed it's already eligible or not. So now here, as I mentioned before, what are the differences between a European or a global fellowship? Well, so in a case of European fellowship, a researcher from a new country, associated country, or any other country, so any country, any nationality is eligible, applies and implements a project in an EU or associated country located host. So let's say an Irish or a Congolese researcher comes to a host organization in a new member state or an associated country to the rest of Europe to implement their project during a period of between 12 or 24 months maximum. In the case of the global fellowship, the researcher must be or an EU national, EU member state national, or national from an associated country national. So here there are some restriction about the researcher's nationality. For the outgoing phase, this means that the project will have an outgoing phase of between 12 and 24 months. 12 months is the minimum. In a third country, this third country can be anywhere in the world. And there will be afterwards a return phase of minimum 12 months in an EU member state host or an associated country host. So this means that the total duration of these projects can be between 24 or 36 months in comparison to the European fellowships. In addition to this, there is also the possibility to add a non-academic placement of maximum 6 months at the end of the fellowship. This is an important element. I will come back to this later on. Yeah, sorry. I forgot this detail. In the case of the global fellowships, it's important to highlight that this mobility to the outgoing phase must be placed at the beginning of the project. So the project must begin by the researcher traveling to this third country host. And indeed, 12 months at the return in Europe or member associated country. So this is a bit of an overview of success rates of the applicants over the last years. As you see, it's a very popular program indeed. Nowadays, we have a growing number of applications for the last years. There was a bit of a decrease in between 2021 with the change to Horizon Europe program. But now we are, for example, last year we had an increase of 15% in applications, and we expect that this year there will be another increase of another 15%. So it's a growing number of applications every year. Just for you to know, like in 2024, we had a total of 10,200 applications. And a final result of almost 1,700 applications funded, giving us a success rate of around 16%. So you see, it's a very successful, very popular, and also very competitive program, as you can imagine, looking at the figures. Here you can see some key figures that we will detail most of them later on. So this is very important. To begin with, this is a program addressed at only postdoctoral researchers, meaning that you have to be in possession of your PhD degree by the time of applying. I will come back to this later on. Another important point is that this program is addressed to researchers in the initial phase of their careers. So that's why we have this limitation of in eligibility criteria that the applicant researchers must have a maximum of 8 years of research experience at the time of application. Again, I will come back to this later on. As mentioned before, also, it's a research mobility scheme, meaning that you must relocate to your host, to the host institution country. It is a program which is aiming at increasing the researchers' career prospects, the researchers' skills through training and experience. And yeah, then we have the possibility of also adding an academic placement, so up to 6 months at the end of the project. In addition to these, there are also the secondments that I will detail in the next slide. Secondments, in comparison to the non-academic placements, are to be implemented during the project for a total of 1/3 of the total project duration, and they can be carried out anywhere in the world. There are no limitations in terms of where you can implement your secondment. As for the duration of the projects, as already mentioned, for the European fellowships, it can be between a minimum of 12 months and a maximum of 24 months, and for the global fellowships, from 24 months minimum to 36 months maximum. And then, in addition to this, in both cases, you can add 6 months extra if you propose a non-academic placement in addition to your project. So now we go in the eligibility criteria. So, as I mentioned before, this is very important. Actually, is a key element that will make the difference between you having you being eligible or not to opt to this funding. Is you must be in possession of your doctoral degree before the call deadline. So if we are saying that the call deadline this year is the 10th of September, by the 10th of September, you must be in possession of your doctoral degree. Or if that's not the case, you must have received an unconditional approval of your defense before the call deadline. So if you are if you are going to get your degree, your PhD degree in October or just at the end of September 2025, unfortunately, you will have to wait 1 year because you will still not be eligible. Another important element for eligibility is the 8 years maximum of postdoctoral research experience. These 8 years are measured from the exact date of you were awarded the PhD. However, here there are ways to extend that time if you have spent some time outside research. So for example, you obtained your PhD award 12 years ago, but then you spent 4 years working in any kind of employment that had nothing to do with research, or you spent 2 years of parental leave, or you were unemployed during those 4 years. So those periods of time that you were not working in research are not counted towards those 8 years, meaning that it helps you extend that time and can give you a more margin, let's say. Then another important aspect in eligibility for the researcher is the mobility rule. Meaning, what is the mobility rule? So in the case of the European fellowships, it means that you shall not have been resident of the country of your host institution for more than 12 months in the previous 3 years immediately before the call deadline. So if we are talking that the call deadline is on September this year, if you have been resident in that country for more than 1 year during the previous 3, you will not be eligible. If you have been resident, but it has been, let's say, 3 months, then yes, that is fine. You would be eligible to stay in that, to apply in a host in that country. In the case of the global fellowships, the mobility rule applies to the outgoing phase host, meaning that on one hand, you may have not been, you should not be resident for more than 12 months in the previous 3 years to the call deadline in the country where you are going to implement your outgoing phase. That's where the mobility rule applies in global fellowships, not in the return phase country. I know it sounds a bit messy. Luckily, this will be very clearly established and very well detailed in once the call opens, and in the guide for applicants, you will have all the definitions clearly stated there, and it will be probably way more clear than what I am saying now, with all this in the middle of all this information that you're receiving all at once. Just another point, for global fellowships, another important aspects for eligibility of the researcher is that in this case, unlike in the European fellowships, where researchers from anywhere in the world, from any nationality in the world are eligible for global fellowships, the researcher must be EU national, national from an associated country, or a long-term resident in an EU country or in an associated country. Definition of long-term residency, maybe you are wondering, it applies to people who has been resident legally for more than 5 years in such country. However, again, this definition will be specified in the guide for applicants once it is published. Actually, I'm aware that they're reshaping the definition to make it even more clear, because in previous calls there has been a bit of doubts in the wording. Now, another aspect that I want to clarify, because normally we find a lot of confusion here, and yeah, it seems that it's a confusing point. The differences between secondments and non-academic placements. So we have three different elements here. Secondments and non-academic placements, and short visits. Short visits, I will just mention it quickly now because it's let's say, I think the easiest to understand. Short visit would be, for example, services would be, for example, field work that you do as part of your ethnographic research, let's say, or a trip or a stay that you make in order to participate in a conference somewhere else. But during it will be a period that even if you are, let's say, outside your host institution, you will still be remain under their direct supervision, and yeah, and so you are basically indeed just implementing a visit, but you don't. There is no other associated partner involved. Also important, these are not excluding each other, so you can actually implement a secondment, a non-academic placement, and a short visit, the three of all these three in your proposal, or none of them. I mean, all is accepted. The only thing we ask you for is to respect the correct terminology. Actually, that will be also beneficial for you in view of the evaluation, to make clear to the evaluators what are you referring to, what is what, and so. So the most important, let's say, or the most tricky ones to differentiate, as I said, are secondments and an academic placement. The secondments can have a total duration of 1/3 of your project, as I said, in the case of European fellowships, which means that, for example, in a project of 24 months, you can be on secondment for a maximum of 8 months. In the case of global fellowships, the maximum duration is 1/3 of your outgoing phase, meaning that, for example, in an outgoing phase of 12 months, but you could spend maximum 4 months in secondment. Another important point is that secondments can be divided into several shorter periods, so you don't have to be those 8 months at once or those 4 months at once. You can go in secondment 1 month in year 1, another month in year 2, as you consider is more gives more added value to your project, actually. The secondments can be implemented both in academic and non-academic institutions. There is no limit for that, and in any country worldwide. So you can go anywhere. Doesn't matter if it's an associated country or not. They can be implemented in any country, anywhere in the world. Important aspect, though, there is no additional budget for the implementation of these secondments. The total budget of your project will not be increased whether you add a secondment or not. This is different in the case of an academic placement, as there will be an additional budget for the NAP period, which, as you see there, it can last up to 6 months at the end of the normal project. Meaning that first you will implement your 24-month project, let's say, or your 36-month project if it's a global fellowship, and then you will add those 6 months at the end. So there will be additional. This is a classic error. You cannot propose a non-academic placement in the middle. Non-academic placement are always to be carried out at the end of the project. As I said, for this, there will be additional budget. An important restriction, though, here is that they must be implemented in an academic institution in a member state or an associated country of Horizon Europe. So here, you cannot go anywhere in the world. It has to be an institution, organization, and company enterprise located in a EU or associated country. And it's something that we always warmly encourage, because yet there are only around 6% of proposals who actually include the proposal of a non-academic placement. So we warmly encourage this. Here I include you some figures. So, for example, how was this year the issue of the non-academic placements in IRIS hosts, where as you see, we had more than 20 NAPs in eligible hosts at submission stage. But still, there were, like, as you see, a good amount of also not eligible NAPs. Sorry, NAP is the shortcut we use for this concept. But at least the ineligibility has been decreasing, meaning that is starting to think what the NAP actually is. Just to also give you a tip already, a most usual case of of NAP ineligibility is normally that the host that is proposed for the NAP is an academic institution. This is a very important point because as soon as we see that your proposed non-academic placement is in an academic institution, in a university, we will consider it not eligible and the NAP will be removed. I mean, your proposal will still be evaluated, but the NAP will not. So this is a very important point. So make sure that if you propose an NAP, you are respecting the eligibility criteria for such an NAP. Now, here we wanted to present you some examples because as I have mentioned a lot of very boring and very complex kind of tongue twisters. But here I'm presenting you, for example, a practical example of how would we check the eligibility of a researcher applying for a European fellowship. So, for example, imagine we have an Irish researcher who was awarded a PhD in 2019 in Sweden. And since then, this person remained living and working there. And now wants to apply for a European fellowship in a host institution in Ireland, being Irish, but having lived since 2019 or longer in Sweden. In this case, let's do the little exercise. So, okay, the PhD was awarded before the call deadline, but less than 8 years have passed. So the PhD is eligible. And the researcher has not been residing in Ireland for more than 1 year in the previous 3 years, as it has been living in Sweden at least since 2018. Meaning that indeed it can actually come back to Ireland, to an Irish institution to implement their European fellowships. In this case, it would be a clear case of yes, it's eligible. Now we have a bit more tricky case. For example, for a global fellowships. Let's say we have an Indian researcher who lived in Ireland for the previous 3 years. They obtained their PhD in 2023 and is applying for a global fellowship with a host in France and an outgoing phase in the United States. So in this case, again, the PhD was awarded before the call deadline, so it's fine. It was obtained less than 8 years since, less than 8 years ago. And okay, this person has not been living more than 12 months in France in the previous 3 years. However, here it's not clear if this person has been or not a long-term resident in the EU or an associated country. So in this case, we will have to go digging it a bit more in detail, checking this researcher's CV, maybe contact the applicant to provide some evidence of some clarifications, to actually get some evidence if indeed was long-term resident and therefore is eligible or not for a global fellowship. So let's say that this would be a more doubtful case. That's why for us we recommend the more clear you can present your CV, your eligibility, the easier it will be for everyone, and we all will be benefited. Now, so how is this evaluation taking place? As you can imagine by the figures that I briefly presented before, it's quite a large scale evaluation. There are very large number of proposals that also involve a very, very large number of expert evaluators involved. Just to give you an idea, this year we had more than 4,000 experts involved in the evaluation process. That's more than 4,000, so you can imagine. How is this organized? Well, the thing is for a standard peer review procedure. So we have 3 experts per proposal. These 3 experts, as you can see there, we try to keep a balance of nationality. So in order to try to avoid any kind of conflict of interest or any other kind of bias. We always keep, we have some rules to keep a balance in nationality, sector, gender, level of experience, and we try to compensate that with among the 3 experts that are involved. In addition, there is also a more senior expert, what we call the vice chair, that overviews the whole procedure. Uh, Again, as I mentioned before, it's a bottom-up program, so both the proposal and experts come from all kind of disciplines. There is no priority. We don't prioritize any kind of discipline, and there is also no discipline that is not accepted. As you say, as you see, it's like completely open. We have all these proposals are divided in 8 scientific panels in order to organize a bit the evaluation. Those 8 scientific panels are chemistry, economics, engineering, environmental sciences, life sciences, mathematics, physics, and social sciences. So you will have to, for example, select one of these panels when you do your application, so it is evaluated by the right panel during the evaluation procedure. It's a single stage evaluation, and the whole procedure takes 5 months. So let's say we begin in around September, end of September more or less, and then normally the selection outcomes are published around end of February, and there are 3 months afterwards to complete the signature of the grant agreements. Yeah, so this is a bit how it works, the evaluation. We receive your proposal, which are then allocated to experts based on the keywords that you have and the descriptors that you have selected in your proposal forms. So this is why the descriptors and the keywords will also be important, and it is up to you that you provide the most accurate ones. So you are also placed with the most appropriate experts to assess your proposal. The procedure goes that each proposal is assessed by 3 different experts individually and separately. Each of them produces an individual evaluation report that afterwards they have to, let's say, through a consensus discussion procedure, they come up with a consensus report and an evaluation summary report that will also include already the score and based on which the final rankings will be obtained. So the proposals are ranked and the funding is allocated based, per scientific panel. Like the funding is also divided proportionally or based on the amount of proposal received for each panel. And also there are 2 separate rankings, one for European fellowships and another one for global fellowships. Another interesting points here for you is all those proposals that might not have got, even if they don't get funding, they will be awarded with the Seal of Excellence if they are above 85% score. And this is interesting because, for example, in some countries, some regions or some institutions, for example, use this Seal of Excellence to provide their own funding schemes to projects of quality. So let's say that this is a guarantee that they can use directly to know where to allocate, for example, their own funding. This Seal of Excellence, as it gives them the guarantee that that project has gone through let's say, a high standard evaluation procedure managed by the Commission. Now, in Horizon Europe, there is also the possibility for resubmissions. The restriction here is that, for example, if in this last evaluation you score above 70%, sorry, you can resubmit again in the 2025 call your same applications. It will be important to indicate that it is a resubmission, but you can do it. If it is below the 70% though, then it will not be possible. You will have to wait at least 1 year to apply with the same proposal again. This I include here because we don't know, even my team, we don't know yet for sure. This will be known when the new call is published. Last year, the threshold was 70%. It is to be confirmed for this year. It's likely that it will be increased a bit, but I cannot give you a number right now. So this you will have to check in the new call. Then here, just to mention also that in case you don't get the fund, you don't get selected, you don't get the funding, and you don't agree with the results, there is a formal evaluation review procedure that you can use to appeal the results. But if that's the case, I will not go in details. You will receive, at the time you receive your results letter, you will have all the details on how to implement this evaluation review procedure if it applies to you, if you are interested. Now one of the aspects that probably you are most interested in, the budget. So the MSCA is a program based on unit contributions. Here you can see a bit what are the different let's say contributions, different categories of budget that will be applied to your project. So there are some, as you see, the contributions on this half of on the left half of the table are those addressed to fund or to cover the researcher's cost. So to cover the researcher's private costs, let's say that this would be like the researcher's salary there, the living allowance, as you see, or other expenses resulting from having to move abroad, mobility allowance. So those are fixed contributions that you will have per researcher per month. Then in blue, you see also some other contributions for the researcher that will depend on a case by case, on your personal case. For example, family allowance, that's the most common one, is applicable to researchers who are married or that who have children. So this you might be eligible or not. That depends on case by case. Same thing. There are some allowances like special needs allowance or long-term leave allowances, but those are to be let's say checked case by case. So I will not go in detail because anyway, you will have to discuss them with REA when the moment comes. So then those are for the researcher costs. As I said, these are aimed to cover the researcher's private costs. Then we have the institutional costs, which are aimed to cover the cost of implementing the project. And it can here there is, let's say, significant amount of flexibility. Here is the let's say the last word would be on the beneficiary organization, who is the one directly managing them. And let's say that these contributions could cover things from, let's say, training of the researcher, traveling to conferences, let's say, even visa costs that the researcher might need to incur. And yeah, materials that are necessary for the project itself, for publication fees, and so on and so on. Important to note that there is a living allowance correction coefficient, which is applied by depending on the country. This is detailed in the information in the new call. You will have this information available. Just as a remark, this allowance, this correction coefficient is applied to the or it's based on the host country of the beneficiary institution. In the case of European fellowships, so it's a unique one. But in the case of global fellowships, for example, you will have could have a separate country correction coefficient one for the outgoing phase host, and a separate one for the return phase host. And last but not, yes,
Sorry
sorry.
to interrupt you. Just we're running slightly
All
behind
right.
schedule. So if you could, in another few minutes, if that was okay. And I know everyone will get the slides are absolutely fantastic, Arantxa. So we will send the slides on to everyone. No, it's a perfect presentation. I don't want to, I know we have a lot of questions coming in as well. So thank you.
Sorry. I'm not paying much attention to the time. My bad. Okay, so now a proposal submission. I will try to go a bit more quickly. So you will have two parts for the submission. One is the application forms, and then the part B is a technical description where you will describe your actual proposal. So in the part A, in the application forms, you will is the structured data that you will enter in our IT system. You will have to indicate an acronym, a title for the project. You will have to select one of the 8 panels that I mentioned before. And 3 descriptors and several keywords for your project. Also an abstract of maximum 2,000 characters, and you will have to declare if your proposal is a resubmission or not. You will have to include also information about you. So as a researcher, when was your PhD award date? All this how long has passed, so we can see how much time has passed since your PhD award, and also your countries of residence for the past 5 years for the mobility rule. Then you will also have to include some basic information about your beneficiary host institution. So the participant information code, the number, that's important, which is your outgoing host institution, and also non-academic placement host, if applicable. Now, a proposal part B, the technical description, that is where you describe your actual project. So there is a limit here of maximum 10 pages. The rest, be aware, will not be seen by the evaluators, will not be assessed. So it's important to stick to the maximum 10 pages with a font size of 11 points. And this template, you will have it available very soon. As soon as the call is open, you will have the template already there to start completing it. Now, the evaluation criteria, I will try to go quickly over this. So this is you will have it also available for you. What is assessed from your technical part? So on the first, you have the excellence. So this would refer to the quality and pertinence of your research objectives. Also, if they are ambitious, if they go beyond the state of the art. It will also be assessed your methodology, and also whether this methodology is interdisciplinary or not. Also the quality of your supervisor and their experience supervising fellows. And also the training that will be provided to the researcher. That's another point here, as well as the transfer of knowledge. So not only the training received by the skills that will be received by the researcher, but also what kind of added value will provide the researcher to the host organization. And last but not least, which is also assessed in this point, the appropriateness and the quality of the researcher's skills and experience. Then this is important. This has the 50% weight of the final score. So let's say that this will be like the most important part. However, don't underestimate the other two, because many times the difference between being funded or not is just some decimals. So every point here is very, very important, and to be really pay attention to it when you are preparing it. So in terms of impact, what will be assessed? It will be assessed, for example, what kind of measures to boost, what kind of measures are made available to boost the employability and the career perspectives of the researcher. What kind of measures are implemented to maximize the impact of the project results in terms of communication dissemination actions, and also the contribution of these project results to society, economy, and science. And last but not least, again, We have the quality and efficiency of the implementation. So what is the quality? It will be assessed what is the quality of the work plan, including the allocation of effort per activity and per work package. Yeah, the assessment of the risks that you present. And also, what is the capacity, the quality and the capacity of the host institution that will be hosting you during the project. Now in the proposal part B, there is a part B2. This one has no page limit, and this is where you will include your the researcher CV. Please be as detailed as possible because this will be part of the evaluation. As we just mentioned, the capacity of the participating organization. Here we will ask you also more detail on for you to show the excellence and the readiness of your host institution to host your project and help you carry out this action. It will also be included here a letter of commitment in the case of global fellowships for this outgoing phase. And yeah, this is important to check also in case there is some slight difference. Normally, you can look examples from the past years, but please use the template of 2025. That's compulsory. Now, I wanted to present you quickly some data about Ireland, the case of Ireland this year. So here, as you can see, the domains with the highest amount of applications in general that we had this year in MSCA PF are, as you see, are mainly focused in social sciences, life sciences, and engineering. In the case of Irish researchers, the trend is okay for the main two panels or areas of research is similar, social sciences and life sciences. But then, well, the third position changes a bit. Here in Ireland, it's more physics and chemistry instead of engineering. Then yeah, here you can see what is the success rate of the highest institutions. As you see, it's a bit below the general success rate. So the general is around 16%. Irish institution would be like around 14.5%. Still quite good. This year we had like almost 350 proposals from Irish applicant institutions, and 50 of them were funded. Among those 50 funded proposals, 7 were global fellowships and 43 were European fellowships. There you can see a bit the evolutions. You will have access to the slides, so you can see more in detail if you're interested. Now, about how are the distribution of subjects among the Irish hosts this last year. This here you can see in the left all the grants. What is the distribution? Again, social sciences, life sciences, and engineering are the main 3 areas. And here, in the case of Ireland, it is more similar to the general trend. The proportions are more in line with the general trend, and also social sciences, life sciences, and engineering are together with chemistry are covering the main part of the funding. Now, just quickly, some common errors that we have noticed in the past years, and they keep repeating, unfortunately. Most important one, don't miss the call deadline. Number 1. Then number 2.
Arantxa, I'm conscious of apologies. I'm conscious of time because I know we have to finish our webinar at half 12. So
yes, my last slide.
Is that okay? This is great. This is great. Common errors. So if you just want to close out for this one, thank you.
Sure. Yes. So yeah, most of these aspects have been covered in my previous slides. So pay attention and please also be aware of the call opening, where you will have all the details and all the detailed documentation, as well as the next call planning, as you can see there. And here, in this last slide, you can see some links that you will be able to use as soon as our colleagues from the NCP share with you the presentation. So very sorry for taking too long, and I thank you so much for your attention. I hope it was useful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Arache. And that was really comprehensive. Really great to have those slides. I know a lot of the questions that are in the Q&A are answered by those slides, which is great. So we wait until the panel Q&A session at the end before we answer some of the questions live. Just to note, to get the maximum benefit of Q&A for all attendees, if you have very specific eligibility questions which are related to your own individual case, please contact the Irish Marie Curie offices directly after the webinar, and we do our best to help. So for the first of our case studies, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Tobias Engel from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. Tobias, please go ahead and begin sharing your screen while I introduce you. So Dr. Tobias Engel is a senior lecturer at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland and a research scientist specialising in epilepsy and its underlying causes. During his career, he's contributed to over 120 research papers. He's very familiar with the MSCA programme. He'd previously led an MSCA ITN, or Doctoral Network Programme as it's now known, and is the current coordinator of an MSCA postdoctoral co-fund project, NeuroAdapt, and is a member of the Ireland-based Neuroscience Centre, Future Neuro. He's also supervised many MSCA postdoctoral fellows. Tobias, I'm really delighted you could join us today, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Can you see everybody? Yeah, is this fine, the presentation?
Perfect, thank
Good.
you.
Fine, okay. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So I guess now this is more from the supervisor perspective, and I got asked to give a little bit so what it involves from the supervisor to applying for Marie Curie's, and also maybe a couple of tips or something if there's anything, or which could help for the proposal. So before starting, I just wanted to, I know that Jane already introduced me, that just to give a little bit of background, because I think it is different. There may be differences depending on the background where you're, as a supervisor, what you're working and what you're looking for in candidates, or how you approach your applications. So my lab is basically, I'm here at RCSI in Ireland, and I'm focused on brain diseases. So we are looking at translational neuroscience. I'm looking here in preclinical models. And I'm just saying also this because this maybe also impact on, as I said, how you approach the application, but maybe also later on, but I have this, and when you talk about budgets and etc. Then just what I've been involved previously in Marie Curie applications. So we have currently 2 fellows working here in my lab. So they were funded in the last cycle, not this one, but the one before. So here one is, for example, working on a diagnostic devices, and another fellow is working here on finding new treatments for epilepsy. And also here we had before already funded applicants in the lab. So we had 5 Marie Curie's before already. And among these 5, for example, I'm going to come back to this later again, we had also one which the applicant, she went to the States for a global fellowship. And just one of the things which I'm going to mention later on again is, if you look at the titles of what we have been funded here, the moment is most of the things, or almost all what we have been funded, is really based around the research, what we're doing in the lab. So I have tried, or we have submitted here already 7, or we have submitted 7 applications, and 7 were funded among these. And I have to say, for example, those non-successful ones, most of them were actually, some of them were outside of our research, but I'm going to come back to this later. So the first thing I got asked to talk about is what are actually the benefits for the supervisor. So we know there's lots of benefits for the applicant, of course, but there's also, I think there are also several benefits really for the supervisor. So it's worthwhile, I think, as a supervisor to get involved in this. So one of the first things would be, I think it gives you the opportunity really to get new people, and you get new techniques. For example, we had a fellowship a couple of years ago who applied in the lab to work with iPSCs. So as I mentioned, my lab is more preclinical, and this gave us, for example, the opportunity now to move also into human models or human cell models, and we have now already a couple of papers published with this. Another postdoc I have working now here in the lab, he's working on developing medical devices for diagnostics. And this was also something which wasn't possible because this is not my area of expertise. So I think this helps to really attract new techniques with the talented people, of course. So the second point here, as I mentioned, so that gives you the opportunity really to attract talented people. And I think not only attract, but also it helps you to maybe sometimes maintain people. So this can be either, so I know there's the 12 months that you can't apply after 12 months if you're already here, but maybe when people come in, they can then start applying for these Marie Curies if they're still within the 12 months, or for example, for your global fellowships, because these people then, they will also still work in your lab here at the, it's based in Ireland. The next thing is, I think they establish new networks. So this is, you know, maybe that if they come from host institutions you haven't been working with together. So this is, you know, everybody who comes in, they have their own network. So I think this is a good opportunity to broaden these networks. Then, apart from the applicant, I know this is very important for their CV, but I think it's also for the supervisor, depending a little bit maybe on the career stage, but especially for myself, it was also at an earlier career stage. Being a supervisor of Marie Curies, it helps also, I think, for your own, you know, CV, but also for, I think it's really well seen by some funding agencies. I think Research Ireland probably likes this as well, that, you know, that you bring in exchequer money from outside, from Europe. So I think this is both good for the applicant, but also for the supervisor on the CV side. And the last point I wanted to make here, for me, it was actually really good to practice writing these EU grants, because they are very similar, even if it's a Marie Curie or whether you apply later also for consortia, they are similar how you write them. And, you know, we have been now successful. We had I was a coordinator here of an ITN several years ago, and now I'm coordinator of a co-fund, postdoctoral co-fund. And I have to say that the way of thinking how you write these grants is a little bit different than other grants. So I think this is also one thing to getting used to and getting more practice. Then the next part is the application process itself. So this is more, again, from the supervisor perspective, I guess. So the first thing here, I think it's important to identify the suitable candidate. And I have put down here a couple of points, which I think are important, but not sure what is more important now. So I think the CV it is important that if the candidate, that he has a suitable CV. So depending on the career stage, but I think it should show that the candidate can drive its own research. It makes it just easier later, because on the fellowship, they have to show that this research is driven by them. Another important part here, I think, is the motivation. So a motivated candidate, it will make it much easier writing up these fellowships, because they are long, they are complex. So, and also once you're funded, of course, you want to have a motivated person in the lab. And at least from my side, maybe this is also depending on the research area where the supervisor works, but it was easier, I think, also to get funded if there was a mutual interest in research and compatible background. So whether there was some common grounds between the applicants and the supervisor. Then next would be then, I think, before writing, then I think it's important. There's a lot of exchange between supervisor and the applicant. Yeah, so I would think that at the start to agree on what is the scientific project. So again, at least in my case, I think it was important that there is some common ground. There's this compatibility between the research. Another thing is also, I think it's important that it's feasible. So depending on what research area this is, so I mentioned before, like I'm working in preclinical models. So you have to make sure that while the budget is nice and everything what you get, but I think you have to be aware of what it is and how much you get, that you can actually do the research. And then the rest, I think, is the same anyway for any other grants. So novelty, ambitious, getting this balance, and that it's impactful. Then when writing, I think one important part here is, and as was shown before, that there's 3 sections. And while the first section is the most important one, it is really just the small differences which will later maybe decide whether you get funded or not. So I think it's really important to keep all sections in the proposal in mind. So when you write up the scientific project, I think it's already important to think what are the impacts of this, because the impact section is also quite big, and you have to, you need some impacts from it. I think it's important when you start writing that you have this already in mind, and maybe don't wait too long. But like as any fellowship, I think it's here also that the earlier the start is, the better. And I think one important part in these fellowships I found is that it's really important that you get this feedback, or that you have these revisions. And I think there's many places, at least when I'm thinking our institutions here, the research office is very, very helpful with things. And, they look at this, maybe you have external consultants, or etc. Because these grants, it's not only the science part, there's many other parts of it, and they're quite complex. So I think getting this feedback on the way when you write this is quite helpful. Okay, so then just on the last slide, so what lessons learned? So I can only talk for me, of course, here, what I think which would help to write the application. So I think one of the important parts, at least what I learned, is that there should be an alignment of a mutual interest in the research. It just makes it easier also to evaluate it, from a supervisor perspective, because if you don't know what the whole project is about, it's difficult first to give input into the whole proposal. And at least I didn't really get funding for research, which wasn't really in my comfort zone. Then again, well, this is a little bit the same, sorry, but the point, I guess, what I wanted to make here again is that just with the feasibility. So I think it's important, and this was also then post-funding, to be honest, that it becomes difficult with, depending on what you're working in, the budget may not be enough or may be enough, but it depends on the research area, what you're really doing here. So I think this is one of the things which should always be kept in mind. So it's not only salary, but you have also the consumable parts, which should be kept in mind. And I guess the other point, what I wanted to make here as well, is if it's a common interest that the lab works, and there's maybe some equipment, some materials that are already there, which can be used then for the same project. And I think this also helps if there's, this common interest in research. Then I think at the time of writing the proposal, it is important that the candidate actually brings something new in, new techniques or maybe new approaches to the research. So one of the proposals we submitted last year, which was not funded, was actually quite close to getting funded, but the main criticism was there that it wasn't really clear what are the new things, or techniques, what the candidate actually brings in. Yeah, so I think that's an important point, to make sure that there's something new, novel, what is brought in. And also, of course, on the other side, that candidates will learn new things. This is all it's more career development, the whole Marie Curie, than just a project grant. So I think we always, as a supervisor, have to keep this in mind as well. Then the motivation, I have to say, when you have motivated candidates and they had both non so motivated, it just makes a huge difference in writing these and putting these proposals together. And afterwards, anyway, then when you do the research, but it's already before the submission, of course, it's really important that the candidate is motivated. The CV, I think the CV is also important, and it's according to the career stage, but I think it's important to show that the candidate has shown that he's driven his own research. So from my point of view, there wasn't necessary that there were all Nature publications or anything, so could be lower, but it has to be that I think, at least from my own experience, so that the candidate, has shown that he can drive his own research. Then another thing what I usually try to integrate in these applications is interdisciplinary approaches. I think this helps also when you later talk about the other sections, like training for the fellow, so that there's really a complete training. You don't have only one small aspect of the research, because as mentioned, I guess this is more a career development plan for the fellow. So this helps, and I usually try to include intersectoral aspects as well, either if it's an industry partner or you can clinic, something like this. So just to get it a more broader scope as well. And I think that, again, this is important, and also for the fellow's career progression. Then secondments here, just to mention that I'm usually trying to put in secondments. If possible, I try to make them also international, but I guess it has to fit with the research. It's just later, again, when you're talking about the other sections here, it just gives you more scope, to talk about the research. And at the end, maybe it's just that it's important, the science part, I think, when this is put together, because everything else builds on it. Yeah, so I think that the science part is not forgotten after all the career development plans and everything else. But I think in the end, it is the science part which is the whole foundation of the rest of the application. And just at the end, the last point here, what maybe then sometimes I get asked, how to identify candidates. I mean, people also you get contacted by people, but another way of how I have found is that, as for supervisors to find candidates, maybe via collaborators or even students who have been previously in the lab. And I have to say that sometimes it makes this a little bit more easier, depending on the person, of course. But if there's already common grounds to write these applications, maybe this helps. And that was that from my side.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tobias, for it's brilliant to end with those lessons learned and some really great advice. I think your presentation answered a number of queries that have come in the Q&A as well. So thank you so much for that. I'd now like to go to our last speaker from our panel today and introduce an MSCA Fellow, Dr. Sarah Josephine Schaefer. So Sarah, please go ahead and begin sharing your screen while I introduce you. So Sarah is a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellow at the University of Limerick. She holds a BA in English and French from the University College Cork, an MA in Journalism and a PhD in English from the University of Galway. And before joining UL, she worked as a teaching associate at the University of Nottingham and as a visiting lecturer at the University of Klagenfurt in Austria. Her research combines sociolinguistics with cultural studies and media studies. And I'm really delighted, Sarah, that you're here with us today. And over to you.
Thanks very much, Jane. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to present at this MSCA webinar today. I hope you can all see my slides.
Yes, all perfect.
Yeah? Okay, great, excellent, great stuff. Okay, so what I would like to do today is I would like to talk a little bit about my journey as an MSc Fellow, and I will also give you a few tips along the way that I found useful, for writing a successful application. Okay, so to start off, I thought I'd talk a little bit about myself and my research. So as you just heard, I'm a sociolinguist. That means that I'm interested in language. And I do not only examine language like in terms of just looking at vocabulary, grammar, and speech and stuff like that, but I look at language in a more broader sense. I'm also interested in music and images and sounds, for example, and also how in particular identity and power and values find expression in language. And in addition, I'm also a journalist by training, so I'm kind of combining these two fields in my research. So yeah, more specifically speaking, I'm looking into media language. I'm interested in how journalists use this language effectively to communicate with their audiences about social issues in society. For my MSCA project then, which is called CIDORA and stands for Community, Identity and Diversity in German Youth Radio, I examine how journalists use language, again, in a broader sense, to try and reach their ethnically diverse audiences. And in particular, I'm focusing here on the reasons and causes for the often criticized negative portrayal of ethnic and linguistic diversity. And I'm also, looking at different ways of how, one can support journalists for more meaningful engagement with diversity. I'm currently in the final stages of my project, which is going to come to a close in June, end of June. And so, yeah, the project involves a few things. First of all, I did linguistic ethnography at a German youth radio station for about 8 months. And yeah, that involves basically being there at the radio station, doing observation of working processes of journalists. And then what I'm also doing at the moment is I'm planning workshops with journalists and journalism students. As part of the project then as well, I'm organizing a conference. And I'm, of course, also attending conferences. I've been to 7 already, 7 international conferences, and there will be 3 more that I will be attending until the end of June. And then I will also, of course, I'm disseminating my research through publications. So these are kind of the main components of my project. And yeah, in terms of career development, then I cannot emphasize enough how much the MSCA, has impacted my career as a researcher. I just want to name a few points on my slides. So the project has really, really strengthened my profile as a researcher internationally. Just to give you an example, I was selected by the European Commission as one of the 10 finalists to participate in what's called the Falling Walls Lab MSCA. I don't know whether you've heard about that before. It's a world-class pitch competition for early career researchers, where you can present your research to an international audience. And for this, I traveled to Mons in Belgium in 2024. And if you are successful with your application, which I hope you all will, then I can only recommend to apply for this event, because it's a really, really great opportunity for you to present your research in a different format, and as I said, to an international audience. In 2024, I also received an early career award for my Sedora project from the German Applied Linguistics Association, and that involved some prize money, which allows me to do further dissemination activities for my project. Beyond these and several other connections in academia that I was able to make during the fellowship, I suppose working with journalists for quite some time also extended my work outside of academia. It allowed me, to really make friends, and also, as I said, to get connections also, for example, for future research projects. And then also the actual process of applying for the MSCA, it gives you so much knowledge on how to successfully write a funding application. And I've now secured a major individual research grant that when my MSCA finishes now at the end of June, that I can start in July and can do my research, continue to do a new research project for the next 4 years. I want to talk a bit about transferable and research skill development as well. So there is quite a lot that you can learn. There was so much that I learned during the fellowship. I just wanted to, again, put a few things on my slide. First of all, the MSCA, it really, really allows you to advance your research skills. For me, this was definitely to learn a new method, which was linguistic ethnography, and also, critical discourse analysis. And so, yeah, it was really, really amazing to be able to learn all of this as part of the fellowship. You also gain a lot of skills in terms of project management, timing and organization of your fieldwork, traveling during the project and stuff. And that also involves budget management skills that you're learning. Especially for me, I had to organize my fieldwork abroad, and I had to also, kind of make arrangements with my, my media organization, my participating media organization, and stuff like that. So, you get some skills there. Then, of course, it will definitely, the fellowship will definitely strengthen your presentation skills. So in addition to conference presentations, I was also invited to give guest talks, for example, and again, that really allows you, to communicate your project in different ways to various audiences. I did some teaching, of course, as well, teaching and mentoring. So that's always a rewarding experience to gain transferable skills. And, I did, for example, MA teaching. I was a module leader, and I did also some postgraduate supervision. So here you have that opportunity to bring your research results to the classroom and, extend your teaching and supervision horizon. And as I mentioned, the fellowship is also great for gaining event organization skills. So particularly, like in my case, when you are planning to, organize some workshops, you can get really, really valuable skills, again, sort of to share your research, in this case, then with a non-academic audience. Okay, then, what are the larger benefits of the MSA fellowship, and why should you definitely apply? Well, because first of all, it's a very prestigious grant, as you know yourself. So it will make you a lot more competitive on the academic job market. Another point that I find very, very important is that you get fully funded research focused time. So, you can work on your own project, you can do what you're passionate about as a researcher, and what drives you forward. And I thought that was really, really, really important. Other wider benefits of getting the MSCA then, of course, again, has to do with the opportunities surrounding networking and traveling. There is this, we heard it before in the presentation, there is the salary, there is, in addition to your salary and allowances, there, as part of the budget, there's the research training and networking contribution of about €1,000 per month. And you can use that money to, do training activities, purchase literature, and, all of those things, conference travel, and those things that you need to do as part of your project. So that's really, really great. Then the next point why you should apply for me definitely is you need, as I said before, you need to produce a very detailed and comprehensive application. And that helps you really to think about, all the things you need to include into a research project application. So when you're successful with your MSc application, it's a really great template for using this to also develop larger research projects and larger applications. And then finally, I think the time you can dedicate to, develop your skills and all the opportunities that you will have during the fellowship to really think about your career development are really, really crucial. So you can really think about, where are there maybe possible gaps in my CV where I can improve, and you can really focus on this and make sure that you can develop further. And this is so crucial, not only for, when you want to stay in academia, but also when you're thinking about, getting a job in a non-academic job market. Just want to talk a little bit about my experience with the application process. So first of all, on the funding and tenders portal, there's loads of information. There are many, many documents available. But I can only say, all of them contain really, really important information. So it can seem a little bit overwhelming when you see it at first, but it's so important that you read all of this thoroughly, especially when it comes to eligibility criteria, the mobility rule and stuff like that. And another thing that helped me very much was that you shouldn't only work with your application template, but it's also really, really good when you also look into the evaluation form. So it contains all the questions that your reviewers will have to answer regarding your proposal. And that's a nice way to kind of check already whether you have everything in your application that will be required of you. Another tip would be in a way that, don't leave your application to the last minute, because you really need time to develop your idea. And although you may think, okay, wow, 10 pages is what I have to fill, that sounds quite a lot. It's actually very little space to, really detailed express your elements of your project and what you want to do. So I don't know, I found using tables also a very good idea, that kind of allows you to maximize space and present your ideas in a condensed format. But as I said, it's really, really important that you start early, and, the editing takes a lot of time and stuff like that. So yeah. Then what's also really important is to make connections with your prospective host institution and with your mentor as early as possible. So finding, out what facilities are there at the host institution that, are important for your project, that, that help you then later on. How much will the mentor help you with the application? And it's really, really important that you also, choose a very, very good host institution that matches very well with the project that you want to do. And in the application form, you need to convince your reviewer why your chosen institution and mentor, are the right choice for the project. And then what helped me very much in this context actually was the research office at my host institution. So again, get in contact early with them. They are really great. They are able to provide you with templates, for example, for structuring your proposal. They will most likely also maybe have limited capacities to review your applications, the earlier, so that you say that you want to apply it better. And, they have so many different guidance sessions and stuff like that you can attend, which are really, really great. And they can be of great, great help when you want to submit your application. Yeah, and then to conclude, I would like to give you a few tips then again for a successful application, and I hope that these will be useful to you. So going into the actual application, I think it's really, really important that you grab the attention of your reviewer in the first paragraph of your application. So, make sure that you state clearly what your project is about. Make sure to state on the first page why your project is new and innovative. That's really important. Then in terms of implementation of your project, make sure that you present things cohesively throughout the application. Like, for example, check, whether your objectives align with the work packages that you're proposing or that you want to do. Then also, I would say that there is no prototypical career path that will get you a grant. Instead, what you have to do is you have to, in a way, convince the reviewers that your track record makes you the perfect person to carry out the project. So list those achievements that can be an asset to the project. And also, I would say remember that the core aim of the MSEA postdoc is to strengthen you as a researcher. So it's not only about funding great research. So also consider your weaknesses. So where can you still improve? What can you include maybe in your application as, rephrasing it as a career development thing, right? So if there is something that you don't have on your CV yet, this could be considered as a weakness, say that this will be something, or look, of course, whether that can actually be the case, that you can, do some career development stuff that can actually fill that gap. And then also, to give your reviewer some information to judge, the impact of the fellowship on your career development, you need to provide detail. So, when you ask your research office early enough for early career training programs, that would be really great. And then name these courses, put that into your application. Also, in terms of skills development, in relation to teaching and supervision, when you speak to your mentor, make sure that you put that in and say exactly how many hours you can teach and stuff like that. And it's also what I found really useful to show that there is a really strong research network at your host institution that you can sort of join, that there may be a research institute you can join and stuff like that. And also, if you it would be important to find out, are there any senior colleagues or other colleagues that share or that could help you in a way then later on with your project, where you can draw on their expertise and stuff like that. Also include that in your application. And then my last point, my last tip would be, if you can, it's really important to get peer feedback. So ask your colleagues to read your application, because, they can be a really, really great source for giving advice, especially, if there's still areas in your application that need improvement. Okay, so that's all from me. What remains to be said is that I wish you, of course, the very best of luck with your application. And yeah, I hope to have shown that this is a really, really great grant that is really worth applying for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's great, and well done on your recent award. So I'd now like to bring in our guests, our panelists, to return to our panel. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions so far. I realise we're running slightly behind schedule. I hope people will be able to stay for just a few more minutes so we get to address some of these questions. And please do follow up with myself and Blanca afterwards if we didn't get to your question today. Irache, as we could see at the registration stage, we have a number of PhD students joining us today, and they're very welcome. But there was questions about, are they eligible to apply for the fellowship? And I know you did address this in your presentation, but perhaps you could just reiterate that part of the eligibility criteria.
Yes, sure. So in order to be eligible, the PhD must have been awarded or unconditionally defended before the deadline of the call, which it is, as of now, the 10th of September. If that's not the case, then you will have to wait for the new call of 2026. So PhD awarded or unconditionally defended before the 10th of September, okay. Otherwise, you will have to wait one more year, unfortunately.
Great, thank you. And we've had a number of queries from people who are thinking about resubmitting. So they were unsuccessful last year, and then they are asking, if they make those changes, can they resubmit this year? So it may not be quite a straightforward answer, I suspect, Irache, but could you address that question for us?
Yeah, so in general terms, so if the threshold doesn't change this year, which is going to be visible once the call is published, at the moment the threshold for being allowed to resubmit a proposal that you submitted last year is that you score a minimum of 70%. So if you are above that threshold, yes, you can resubmit, always indicating that it is a resubmission in the form. If not, you will have to wait, because you would not be allowed to resubmit this year. But let's say in 1 year or 2 years' time, you would be allowed to resubmit that in general terms.
Yeah, so that's it. You can't resubmit with the same host organization. So it's not to do with the science as such. It's the
Yes, not the same host, not the same researcher. Yeah.
Yeah, great. And I might bring in our other panelists, Sarah and Tobias here. Tobias, you addressed in your presentation how supervisors might find a fellow. And can I ask you the specifics in your two postdoctoral fellows that you have at the moment? How did you find them? Were they through your networks or did they contact you?
Well, to be honest, one I got forwarded from research office, so he actually asked here at the university, and they followed, like, because this research fell within what I'm working in, so this was forwarded from there. And the other research fellow, I knew him from before, because he was already in the lab as a visiting scientist. He went back, and then we applied then together for this Marie Curie fellowship.
Great. So I think sometimes applicants are worried if they don't have a connection, but that's very interesting that one of your fellows contacted the research office in the host organization. So that's good to know. That's very encouraging. And just to let any applicant who is worried about finding the perfect or the best host organization and supervisor for their particular project, is to have a look at the Euro Access website, because often organizations, institutions post expressions of interest there. And that's not the only way to contact anyone. So as Tobias has said, people are doing a variety of different ways. And you can always talk to your own PhD supervisor, explore your own network as well to try and find people. I might turn to Sarah now and ask, how did you select your host organization?
Yeah, I actually, I started with selecting the mentor. And that was kind of, my PhD supervisor, first of all, who gave me that good tip. But also, of course, it's really important that you see that the mentor has, similar interests and stuff like that, and that you find out about their track record and stuff like that. So, of course, that's also something that I did. And then I also looked further into the host institution and, what kind of facilities are available there that would be important for my project. Is there any career development opportunities for early career researchers there that I can take? Is there a research institute, which was the case for my application, that would, where my project would match with? And also I looked, are there other colleagues there that, that I could, that would be possible collaborators in the future, and that, could share their expertise and stuff like that. So there were many aspects that I was looking for.
Yeah, I think that's so important, really, to reiterate that it's you have to think about really what's going to be the perfect who's going to be the perfect supervisor and the perfect host organization for your particular project. So it's worth thinking about it. I know there was lots of questions that came in on our live Q&A about that, and thank you very much, Sarah, for that. And I was delighted to hear you mention the research office as well, and actually Tobias mentioned research office too. So as national contact points in Ireland, we negotiate our review proposal supports through the central research offices. So we'd really advise people to contact when they've decided on their host organisation, secured a supervisor, to make sure their research office knows of their existence too, so they can avail of all the internal supports that are there as well. Sarah, I was going to ask you a question that's probably a tricky question, but how you mentioned about not leaving things to the last minute with proposal writing, which is a very human thing, I suppose, to do. But how long did it take you to write and develop your proposal?
Yeah, I suppose, developing an idea is, a very tricky part, and it takes quite a long time to, think about all the different components of the project and stuff like that. I think I got in contact with the research office actually about 5 months in advance. And then, they, as I said, they had workshops and stuff like that I could attend, and they had very interesting sessions, to help you to, write your application. And then the actual process of writing it, I think it took me 2 months to do that, to really sit down and, be very focused and write the actual proposal.
Okay, that's good to know. So it's very much lots of work done over the summer. And I might ask you, Tobias, about in terms of your interaction with researchers in advance of the deadline. Could you tell us a little bit about the engagement you would do during that time?
Yeah, I guess it's again as soon as possible, I think, to get the idea, to know what you want to do, because it's a long process. So the first thing would be, as I mentioned before, it's like maybe getting the idea what you want to do, but this has to be done in time. I don't know, like a month before is not enough. You really start 5-6 months before talking about this. And then engagement, it depends really on the applicant. Like I think the more engagement, I can just say, the better. If there is, so there's applicants who write the whole thing up on their own. And then, on their own, of course, but I mean that you write everything without discussion, which makes it more difficult than if there is engagement and this back and forth between supervisors and discussing the ideas, because they are complex. But yeah.
Great. I'd really echo that as well. So more engagement, the better. And I always think a critical eye on a proposal is very, very helpful. Arantxa, I might come back to you with a number of questions, and many of them in the Q&A I think will be answered by the presentation and the slides afterwards. So I hope that gives a lot of solace to people who may have particular questions. We had a question about the timelines between the deadline is obviously September. When could people expect to get results, and when do projects, when can they start? So I wonder, could you give us an indication of the timeline?
I mean, as indicative timeline, it was it's in one of the slides, but let's say indicatively, because the dates are not fixed yet until the call is published. But yeah, the call is closing 10th of September, and the results would be published around, let's say, mid-February, more or less. That's how it has been the last years. And the projects, because it takes a bit of time to sign the grants and so on, normally the earliest they begin is in April. So it would be April 2026.
Great, thank you very much. And so it's about the 5-month mark really for the results, and I think that query it's a lovely problem to have when you're worrying about the start date. So you've already got been awarded the proposal, and I think for this year's awardees, if I can remember, they could start early, and they had until I think the 1st of September of the following year.
Yes,
to start.
exactly.
Yeah, so it's
almost a 2-year margin.
2-year margin, so plenty of time. So please don't let that stop you applying. In terms of the question about MSCA, does it have any prioritizing themes? And I wonder, would you address that, Arantxa, as well, please?
No, as I mentioned before, there is no priority topic, no priority research field. Every kind of topic is welcome, and there is no, as I said, it's a completely bottom-up approach. So you propose a topic, and there will be no preference for one or the other. I mean, we're all equally treated. If they are more on one field or the other, depends more on the amount of application on that particular field, but not in any kind of political priority or anything like that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think Sarah made the point earlier about the importance in that opening of articulating how important your research is. And that can be done in a number of ways. Just one of the ways is if it's a European priority. Now, that's different for the question that was being asked about MSCA priority, because it's open to all disciplines. But it's very useful, as Sarah said in that opening section, to really get into the nitty-gritty about why your research is so important and why it deserves to be funded. I suppose I'm conscious of time, so I might just go for one quick question, if I can. And that was a question that came up from a number of people. And Tobias, I might direct this to you first. But a number of people who are thinking, am I good enough to apply at this point? Is my track record good enough to make me competitive? Sarah, I might ask you as well to comment on it as well. But Tobias, I wonder, how would you advise an applicant who is worried about their track record?
I mean, I think the CV is an important part in the whole thing, but I also know that the reviewers, they will take into account the career stage. I think this is the first thing that people have to take. Like if it's later on, then it is expected that they probably have published more than when they just finished their PhD. But It's a difficult question because I had several applicants which maybe the CV wasn't as strong as others and they got still funded. So I don't think it's it doesn't mean if you don't have high impact papers that you can't get your Marie Curie, because as long as the project is good and it aligns with what you have done. But I think you have to show, what I would like to see on the CV is really to see something that they drive their own research. I'm not sure whether, you know what I mean, that you can see that, maybe that they have a first author publication in there would help, I would think. It's just that they have done the research.
Yeah,
You can
absolutely.
see there's actually something you can build on for the progression. But
Yeah, great. Thank you. That demonstrates potential. Yeah, and Sarah, I don't know if you'd like to add to that, or people who are worried about their own track record.
Yeah, I can only agree with what Tobias was saying. So it's really, really important that your CV kind of shows that you are the person that can actually undertake the project that you want to do. And from my own experience, I didn't have many publications to put on my application, but I had other things, like I had work experience that I could show in media organizations, for example. I had a quite strong teaching experience that I also could show. And I also had a publishing contract with a reputable publisher for my monograph, my PhD monograph. So these were kind of other things that I think that helped me, and the reviewers, they considered it, a good track record. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have very many publications, but as long as everything that you can show on the CV shows that you are, able to conduct the project that you want to do, I think, you're fine.
Great, thank you very much. And unfortunately, I'm watching the clock here, and unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. And thank you everyone, all the panelists, for giving up their time, and particularly for the extra few minutes there. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I hope people found it informative and useful. I know I did. A recording of today's webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel, and a link to the recording will be sent directly to all those who registered so we can listen back. If you'd like to hear more case studies about successful projects from Irish organisations, you can check out our previous webinars for the last few years, which are also available on our YouTube channel. And just to let you know that the Irish Marie Skłodowska office will deliver a two-part proposal writing workshop for applicants applying to the 2025 call with a host organisation in Ireland. And this will take place in May and be advertised via our social media channels. So please do stay tuned for that. For now, though, I want to wish everyone a very pleasant morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are joining us from. And I very much look forward to speaking to everyone again soon. Goodbye for now, and thank you very much.